Hello, AP World History students. I'm Miss Ziegler, the Time Machine teacher, and tonight we are going to do our next segment of the amazing review, Race to a 5. Let me know when you get here, and I'm also going to drop the stuff that you need here in the chat. What's up, Fardeen? Welcome in. This is the Google form that you're going to need tonight. It's also down in the description below. Good news, this week you only have one unit. We're only doing unit 6 this week. What? You guys are used to doing 3 or 4 or 2. So this week you get a little bit of a break and we're only going to do unit 6. We're slowing it down just a little bit, which is good. But we are getting close to that exam, so you got to keep working hard. I have been checking your amazing race so far, and so far, most of you who are tuning in on Thursday nights are doing it, so that's good. It will pay off, I promise you that. So this is what this week's assignment looks like, and you're doing everything that is highlighted in orange for a grade. Watching the video over period 6 and taking notes, and then we're going to do the practice DBQ tonight, and then writing context. All the rest of this is extra credit or extra points for the race. So, don't take this stuff lightly. It's good to look over this, especially these vocab words. If you don't know some of them, make sure and look at them up. All right, so tonight we're going to look at a practice DBQ. And let me see if I can find it. Here it is. It's actually the DBQ from 2018. So what is really cool about this is that you can get some of the old tests online. The problem is that the format kind of changed. And so the DBQs were a little bit different a couple of years ago. So if you can look past that part, then there's quite a bit to choose from, but the format's just going to be a little bit different. Hey, Divya, welcome in. You can grab the link either in the description or the chat right above where you put your comment of what we're doing, and we're just about getting ready to start the DBQ. The DBQ link is also in the description below, but you probably won't need it because I'm going to show it to you. Before the DBQ, though, there are some SAQ questions that you can practice. So you might want to check those out at a later date. And the DBQ that we're going to practice tonight starts on page 6. This is the one from 2018. They don't have the 2019 on there because it was a completely, well, actually, would have been 2019? Last year's. They don't have last year's. I think that was 2020 because it was a completely different rubric. So that's why they don't have that one on there. But I will show you the website and where you can access these and everything at the end of this video. Let's go ahead and see if we can figure this. Okay, let's see if we can figure this one out. Our prompt is evaluate the extent to which railroads affected the process of empire building in Afro-Eurasia between 1860 and 1918. So evaluate the extent. We see that often, right? We need to know how major or how minor it was. And then what are we looking for? Can anybody tell me in the chat? What are we evaluating? Break it down. Are we looking for cause and effect, similarities and differences, change in continuity? What do you think? Okay, so our location is Africa, Europe, and Asia. We might be able to talk about the Industrial Revolution. That could come into play in context, perhaps. Yes, good. And we're looking for how railroads affected the process of empire building. So how did railroads lead to empire building or cause empire building or affect them in any way? What do railroads have to do with empire building? And yes, you could do cause and effect in this. Let's read our documents and see how we could kind of group these together, okay? So our first document, I want to try to go up a little bit. There we go. The source is a petition. Oh, before we get really started, sorry, I forgot. You need this, the Dbq Organizer. This is what we're going to put our information on. On the day of the test, what you want to do is just have a piece of paper that you can make this little chart on. And then that way you can write your information down as you're finding it, because you're probably not going to be able to switch between screens. So it'll be important to have a piece of paper beside you, okay? So we're thinking this is probably going to be causation. I'm going to highlight that. What are we looking for? We're looking for how railroads affected empire building. And our time period is, what was it? 18. I don't know why my mic keeps doing that. Sorry about that. 1860, 1918. So kind of unit 6, definitely after the Industrial Revolution gets going, we're into imperialism. So we might want to keep those in mind as we think about context as well, okay? Now, for each one of your documents, you are describing, supporting, and seeing if you can explain it in any way. So our very first one is a source. It is the source is a petition in English to the British colonial government of India from the British Indian Association, an organization consisting of high caste Indians, 1866. So we already know for this one, we're going to be able to do point of view because it's coming from the high caste Indians. So it's not low caste, they're high caste. So they're richer, they're well off in the caste system. So back here on your organizer, dang it, my microphone keeps turning off. So weird. Okay, I'm going to put point of view. And I'm just going to abbreviate for now, but I'm going to remind myself it's coming from high caste Indians. So we know that socioeconomic status is something that affects point of view, right? It's going to make you think differently. And it is in English, it's to the British government. Okay, so we could also do audience on this one as well, but let's see if point of view would be easier. So it says, railroad travel for Indian natives has for a long time been full of the most bitter and serious grievances. The miseries suffered equal the horrors of the Middle Passage. So they're talking about slavery there. We would beg to draw your attention to the bad treatment of native passengers, with no distinctions being made between them. Indiscriminate abuse is lavished freely without regard to difference in rank and social scale. Passengers have often been struck and otherwise treated with great indignity. Passengers traveling in second class are not even allowed to get to the platform, but are made to herd with the masses outside. We would like to emphasize the painful fact that the most respectable natives are liable to personal ill treatment and loss from their European fellow passengers in the second class carriages. Native gentlemen of birth and respectability, in striving to avoid the large crowds to be found in the third class carriages, find themselves even worse off in the second class seat. In a variety of ways, attempts are incessantly made to degrade and insult second-class passengers. We want to draw attention here to the present impossibility of native ladies of respectable birth, breeding, birth and breeding, taking advantage of railroads. The honor of our wives and families is very dear and sacred to us, and the advent of the railroad has cut off old modes of transit without providing adequate ones for respectable women. All right, so Bardeen says it describes that Indians are mistreated during traveling in railroads. Yes, that's perfect. So for describes, I'm just going to put a D beside that so we remember that it's describes. Indians of high class, right? Indians of high class are mistreated and have to ride with lower class on the railroads. Yes, I can send you the link through Teams. Just give me a second. I don't have Teams open. Oh, you got it? Okay, great. Now, the bigger question is, what could we argue with this in regards to railroads and this time frame? Anybody have any ideas? What could you argue here as an effect of how railroads were in regards to, what am I trying to say? Empire building. We know that Britain is trying to build an empire in India and like add on to their empire, right? Railroads were a part of that. Yes, Industrial Revolution, but how would that tie into this, Fardeen? And does it talk about Industrial Revolution? Not really, right? Think about the colonial government in India. We know that a lot of Indians weren't really happy with it. They didn't really want to be taken over by the British. So eventually they're going to start what kind of movements? The prompt is evaluate the extent to which railroads affected the process of empire building. What kind of movements will the Indians eventually start? It's something that is going on at this time frame in a lot of places, not just India. Okay, civil disobedience, but why? Why do they go towards that? What about nationalism? Could we tie nationalism to this? Do you think that this abuse could eventually lead to them wanting their freedom from the British and in turn wanting nationalism? What do you think? Give me some of your thoughts. For example, could this ill treatment lead to them having a nationalistic movement in order to get the British out? Yeah, the British don't care. They don't care about the Indians or what the Indians think, right? And this kind of treatment is almost pushing Indians away. So how does the railroad have to do with all of that? It's kind of promoting, because of the problems with the railroad, it's promoting nationalism. So I'm going to put a note there about nationalism. And you need to pull something from the document that proves that and put it in your own words. Where's my thing at? Hold on. I'm on the wrong screen. So if we pulled something from the document, we could maybe say that railway travel is a horrible experience for Native Indians because they are discriminated against and put in with second-class citizens or something like that, which will push them towards the desire for nationalism. So when you're putting it on your notes, put it in your own words, and then that way it'll be ready for you to write the DBQ later. So according to the document, high-class Indians were being discriminated. Well, we already said that in the description. So we need to pull a specific example. Sorry, I forgot about that. Passengers have been struck and otherwise treated with indignity. They travel in the second class. So you could say something about how they are pushed in crowded areas with second-class citizens, and it's not safe for women or respectable men, right? High-class citizens or high-class Indians are shoved in with lower class, not safe. I'm basically just pulling some of what he's saying out of the document. He wants it to be safer for their wives and families. So not safe for wives and families. That pushes them towards fighting for that pushes them towards the belief of nationalism. So our group here could potentially be that one effect is nationalism. One way that the railroads affected it was the push for nationalism. We could also maybe talk about discrimination. That could maybe be a group. Remember, when you're brainstorming, these groups can change because we have to find other documents that would go with these topics. There may be one for nationalism and not one for discrimination, or vice versa. Okay. Let's go on to document number 2. Document number 2 is from the Qing dynasty official and advocate of domestic reforms. It's a memorandum to the Qing court. So audience is the Qing court, right? That one would be maybe easy to do. What shall we do about telegraphs and railroads? The Qing dynasty built the Great Wall, and at the time it was considered a disaster. But later, generations relied on it. If telegraphs and railroads are built, China will likewise enjoy great benefits from them in the future. Moreover, as the work of constructing them is enormous, it will be quite beneficial to the poor people now. However, although the foreigners plead with the court to conclude a formal treaty permitting them to begin this work, this absolutely must not be done. Perhaps the government would give its generous permission for only if Western interests can devise a plan that would guarantee that no arable fields, houses, or ancestral graves would be harmed in the least. Otherwise, permission should decidedly not be given. What do we think about this one? Perhaps nationalism, perhaps. Nationalism didn't really take root as much in China, though. And the Qing, they were still in power, even though there were spheres of influences, right? So possibly maybe self-government. What is it saying about empire building as a whole? Do they want the Westerners to come in? There's part of it that says, hey, yeah, we want this. This would be a benefit for us. Right here, he says it would be a benefit for the future, but only if Western powers are not destroying the land, right? So down here it says, perhaps the government would give its generous permission, but only if Western interests can devise a plan that would guarantee that fields, houses, and graves are not going to be harmed. Otherwise, don't let them in, right? So he's saying it is good. We know that we need this for the future. We know we need this to progress, but only if they don't harm the lands. So that would be the description. Let's see. The railroads and telegraphs would be a good thing. If they don't harm the land in the process. Basically what he's saying. Could we maybe group this one as just developing the colonial, helping that railroads helped to develop colonial lands? Like that was one of the effects. One of the ways that it affected it is that railroads are like bringing in that progress and helping to develop the colonial lands. Might be able to do that. So for the group possibility, I'm going to put down, I'm going to highlight railroads helped develop colonial lands. And then to prove that, we could pull this part out where it says China will greatly benefit from them in the future. So you could say that the writer compares the railroads to the Great Wall of China and how generations thought that it was silly at first, but later they're going to really depend on it. And he feels as though that telegraphs and railroads will bring progress to China. So we can put that in later when we write the DBQ. Let's see. But something like that would be pulling some of the stuff out of there, and that would prove the argument that railroads are going to help to develop the colonial land. Now, we know it's to the Qing court. Is there anything in here that maybe he's like saying directly to the audience? Down here, he says, perhaps the government could give its generous permission. Like he's not being bossy. He's just kind of like suggesting. Why is he doing that? Because he's talking to the court. He's talking to the government, and he's not wanting to come off so bossy, I guess. He wants to be more humble. So you could say he speaks in a humble manner by saying that they could give their permission. And he speaks this way So anytime anybody is talking to the government or to a king or a queen, they might be less bold and more humble in the way that they speak, kind of like sucking up. Okay. Document number 3. Document number 3. Here we go. This source is from the Ottoman government report concerning a proposal to build a railway from Damascus to Mecca. Well, thank you, Fardeen. I appreciate it. You and Tabena are definitely holding down the chat for me. I appreciate that. All right, so this is a government report, and it's a proposal to build a railroad. All right, so most likely the audience is also the government or the Sultan. So let's keep that one in mind, and then if that's what we figure out, then we'll put that down as audience. So it says, unless an alternative way, sorry, I can't read tonight. Unless an alternative way other than the Suez Canal, controlled by the British, is found to connect the holy cities of Mecca and Medina to the rest of the empire, the Red Sea coast of Arabia must fall prey to the evils of those who strive to overthrow the very foundations of the caliphate. Caliphate is the Ottoman Sultan claims that title, okay? At present, Muslims going on pilgrimage must either use foreign ships where they are subjected to humiliation or travel by camel, a very challenging journey through months of drought. It has become necessary to construct a railway in this region, both to solve these problems and to show the power of the caliphate. The railway has to be built solely by Muslim involvement, by obtaining a huge amount of finance from the Islamic world and recruiting Muslim engineers in its construction. So the fact that it's going to be all Muslim, what does that sound like? We have a group. Starts with an N. What do you think, Fardeen? I'm going to leave that one to you since Tabena has eaten dinner. It says, our Sultan must personally lead this highly significant undertaking. Muslims across the world hold our Sultan in very high regard. Therefore, people of political and economic influence will not hesitate to allocate some of their assets to this cause when they see our Sultan personally leading the initiative. Muslims don't want to travel with non-Muslims. Yes, so they want their own railroad. And the reason they didn't want to travel with non-Muslims is because they were humiliated, right? And if they have their own railroad, then they won't have that problem. So that's a good description. And definitely we could do audience on this one. So let's put audience. The audience is the Sultan. And how does he speak to the Sultan? What's the tone? Wording does he use? I keep flipping off of the wrong screen here. Down here he says, our Sultan must personally lead this highly significant undertaking. Muslims across the world hold our Sultan in a high regard. Therefore, people of political and economic influence will not hesitate to allocate some of their own assets to this cause when they see our Sultan personally leading the initiative. Is he kind of sucking up a little bit? Definitely. Absolutely. So he is, I don't want to say sucking up, but he is flattering. And then for the description, Muslims don't want to travel with non-Muslims as they are discriminated against. well discriminated. That'd be great. There we go. And so they want their own railroad. Now, we already have railroads help to develop colonial lands and nationalism and discrimination. So maybe we could put it with this group up here. Do you think that we could pull something from that document to prove nationalism? Probably, because look at all this right here. Where's it at? The railway has to be built solely by Muslim involvement, so they don't want any outside help. Obtain a large amount of finance from the Islamic world, and recruit Muslim engineers. So all Muslim. Definitely nationalism. Hey, Wan Ying, welcome in. Do you miss AP World? So the railroad will be built using all Muslim labor and money, Muslim money from the Islamic world. So the effect here would be nationalism. They don't want any outside influence. Nationalism. I cannot type or talk tonight. There we go. Nationalism. And we could say nationalism driven by discrimination. That would work too. Okay. How's everybody doing out there? Did anybody group these documents differently? Let me know if you see something different in the document that you'd rather use. Joaquin says, I still remember you have students from the other over the world. Oh yes, over the world. Yes, last year was really an awesome thing. When COVID happened, we even had a kiddo from China. Remember that, Wan Ying? That was kind of cool. She would wake up at like weird hours of the night so she could join us. It was so cool. We had some from California, all over the place. We don't have as many this year from all over. It's mostly us Houstonites. But that was definitely fun last year. All right. Document 4. Let's look at document 4. Document 4 is the Cape to Cairo Railway and Roads gigantic proposal. And then there's that little asterisk. So that asterisk, you want to follow it down here. And it says Cecil Rhodes was a British imperialist and entrepreneur. The proposed railway in the illustration was never fully built. So remember, Cecil Rhodes was the one that had 1 foot here and he was stretched out all the way down here. This was the proposal to get a railroad to go from North to South Africa. Why were they wanting to do this? What was the point here? It would have been British controlled if it would have been fully built. There were parts of it that are built though. What do you guys think? Why build this railroad? What does this document support in relations to railroad and empire building? Okay, definitely supports expanding and increasing British territory. The British would have already had this territory, right? But like kind of like keeping it together. So for our describes, the map shows the proposed railroad that the British wanted to build. from North to South Africa. Now, if you remember who Cecil Rhodes is, this might be a good place to put in some outside evidence about Cecil Rhodes. Remember we talked about how he owned a diamond corporation, got rich off of imperialism, and owned a diamond corporation. I think there's only one. Oh, maybe corporation in Africa. And then you could talk about the political cartoon. North and South Africa with a telegraph. Press to Africa and justify, and in the eyes of the British, justified imperialism. Now, when you're going through this the first time, you can make just little notes like this. You wouldn't necessarily have to write it out in full sentences because you're going to do that later when you write your DBQ. I'm just doing it in full sentences now so that you'll have it. Just keep that in mind, though. So could we put this with any of the groups that we already have? We have nationalism, and we have helps develop colonial lands. Probably would support this one, right? Because the railroad, what they built was helping to develop colonial lands. And then what could we pull from the document to prove that? You could say something like, the railroad was never finished, but the parts that were finished helped transport goods. And then maybe pull some information from it, like the parts that were completed were in Egypt and South Africa. So you could say, especially in Egypt and South Africa, where the railroad was complete. The faster you can go through this and plan it, though, the better, because then you're going to have more time to actually write it. The point, though, is to try to get as much out the first time you read these documents so that you have enough to be able to write it. All right, document 5. Here we go. Let me know if I'm going too fast and I need to give you more time, because I will. So document 5, the source is from, the explain part. For this one, I don't know. This one might be kind of hard to do. Well, I guess you could probably do, it was an article from the Auckland Weekly News. So it's a newspaper published in British New Zealand. So the audience would be people in New Zealand, but you have to be able to answer why that was important. So that one might be kind of a tough one. Unless, like, it could be that he's kind of showing off his proposal. You could do purpose. Purpose would probably be the easiest one, and you could say that he was, but what from the document? I don't know. What do you guys think of that one? Hey, Tesneen. That's awesome. Yeah, I remember you. How's A-Push going? That's so awesome that you got a 4. Congratulations. Good job. That's not easy to get, so good job. Yeah, maybe he's kind of showing off to them what is going on in Africa and like what the British could bring to New Zealand. You could maybe say something like that. So maybe purpose or audience. Dun, 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 dun. I'll put a question mark there and we can figure that one out when we go back to it. Okay, number 5. Source number 5. Sir Henry Norman, he's an English politician. This is an editorial discussing the Trans-Siberian Railroad, News Chronicle, published in London. So Trans-Siberian would be going through Russia. A-Push is pretty nice, but a lot more content. Yes, it is. It's really in-depth content because they don't have as much history to cover as we did. So yeah, I hope you do well on the exam. Let me know if you need any help studying. All right, so since the Great Wall of China, the world has never seen an undertaking of equal magnitude. Russia single-handedly had conceived it and carried it out. Its strategic results are already easy to foresee. It will consolidate Russian influence in the Far East in a manner yet undreamed of. But this will be by slow steps. The expectations that the railroad could be used to transport masses of soldiers from European Russia to China, either in response to an attack or for Russia herself to launch an attack, is yet far from becoming reality. The line and its organization would break down utterly under such pressure. But bit by bit, it will grow in capacity, and the powers that have enormous interest at stake in the Far East, if they continue to sleep, as England has done of late, will wake and find a new, solid, impenetrable, self-sufficient Russia dominating China as she has dominated sooner or later every other Oriental land against whose frontier she has laid her own. So definitely the description of this would be how Russia is expanding with the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Description. And that what's going to happen with China? Is China going to like this? It's a possibility things might not go well, right? Just trying to find my note on this. What do you think, Fardine? Could it be bad? Could it cause tension? What did it say about that part? Anybody else want to help Fardine out? He's like the only one answering questions. But you're doing good, Fardine. You're doing good. Who is in China right now? Whose empire is in China? Like, who does China belong to? China will not like it and enforce their profits to build the railroad. Yet, China is definitely not going to like it. But who else will not like it? Who has influence in China at this time? Here's the documents for you, Savannah. The British are in China right now, right? With spheres of influence. So what he's saying is, listen, British people, you're sleeping right now, and you're not paying attention to the fact that Russia is creeping closer and closer and closer to our imperial lands. And once they get this railroad built, they could send soldiers to attack. And then we're going to be in trouble because we have interest in China, right? We're in China and we're dominating them right now. Russia might come over there and grab it, right? So there's that threat there. There's that tension. So Russia expanding, and that they could possibly attack China and threaten British interest. So how could we group this one? It probably wouldn't go with nationalism because it has nothing to do with that. It's not really helping to expand the British Empire or Russia's empire unless they would take over China. But it does cause tension between states, right? So maybe the effect here could be that tension that's being caused between those two states or the nations, right? So we could say that the group would be tensions with other nations. That could be our group, maybe. And what would we use from the document to prove that? We could say that the British aren't paying attention to the fact that the Russians are close or getting closer to China. Because of the railroad. And let's see if we can find something that eventually, when the British will realize that Russia will be able to dominate China, and it will be too late for the British to do anything about it. I pulled that from the very bottom or the very end where he says that they'll wake up and then it'll be too late. Definitely to Bena, probably more to attack. That's what the British are worried about because they're in China. They don't want to be attacked by the Russians. Without that railroad, there's enough distance between them that it's not a threat. But when that railroad comes in and can take soldiers, then that's a problem. Okay, we need to add in document 6. I forgot to put that in there. Document 6. Oh, what happened? You know what? I don't think I made a copy of this. I hope are you guys filling this out? Because I'm going to have to delete this. If you're not filling this out, make a copy for yourself right now. Because after this is over, I'm going to delete it for the other people that watch this. So if you haven't made a copy, make a copy right now. All right, document 6. That's what we're on right now. Let's flip back to that. Oh, could we do audience, purpose? What do you think? Maybe maybe purpose, because he's trying to persuade the British government to change their policy, right? And he's doing that with like pretty strong tones down here at the bottom. He's saying, hey, like, wake up from your sleep. Russia's going to dominate us pretty soon. So purpose, to get the government to change the policy. Okay. Document 6. The source is Ernst Röhm. He is a governor of French West Africa. Speech delivered before the Colonial Administrative Council in Dakar in 1904. We wish to truly open up to civilization the immense regions that the foresight of our statesmen and the bravery of our soldiers and explorers have passed down to us. The necessary condition for achieving this goal is the creation of lines of penetration, a perfected means of transportation to make up for the absence of natural means of communication that has kept this country in poverty and barbarianism. True economic activity cannot even be conceived without railroads. It is therefore our duty as a civilized nation to take these steps that nature itself imposes, and that are the only effective ones. It is now everyone's conviction that no material or moral progress is possible in our African colonies without railroads. So let's look at our groups. We have tensions with other nations. Won't really fit with that. Help to develop colonial lands. Yep, I would say so. So the description is that railroads must be built to bring progress. Now, the reason why, Tabena, I don't think I would put this one with nationalism, is because it's not talking about any resistance from the African colonies. It's talking about bringing this progress to Africa. If it were talking about how they're resisting it, then possibly. But because it isn't talking about that, it's talking about how like they're going to help those in poverty and bring progress. I think that it would go more with our group about helping to develop the colonial lands. Does that make sense? Let me know. Okay, so helping to develop the colonial lands, we got to pull something from that to prove that. Why do I always do that? I need to flip this screen right here. So we could use probably there was because of lack of technology, there weren't ways to get around the country. I'm taking this part right here, the transportation and the absence of natural means. And then in order to bring about progress, railroads needed to be built. And this was the British duty of civilizing and bringing progress to Africa or something like that. And basically, I'm just taking this part and rewording it. So let's see. Railroads must be built to bring progress. How could we word that? Let me look at the document again. The people were poor and savage instead of barbarian, right? Poor and savage. And after the British came, they brought new means of communication and transportation. We could say something about like their duty was to do this, and then this brought progress, something like that. It does increase British dominance. Yes. So in actuality, Fardine, that's a good point. In actuality, so he's saying that we're bringing this to you and we're going to make your land better. But in actuality, it really helps the British too. So you could add that in. In reality, it helps British build their empire and establish dominance. Good. That's really taking that document and using it. You could put economic activity could not continue without the railroad. Yeah, that would work too, Tavanna. And let's see. It is a speech delivered before the Colonial Council. So the Colonial Council would be those from the African colonies, right? And so he is probably trying to persuade them that this is really good for you. This is going to really help you out. And how does he do that? He tells them true economic activity cannot happen without railroads. You want true progress? It has to be with railroads, right? So you could do this one as audience. And he is being persuasive. Allow the British access. Now, the British would have probably just taken access, but it's easier to not be fought against, right? It's easier to be allowed in. All right, we got one more. Document 7. Document 7. I'm going to give you a minute to write that down. All right, document 7. This is Lieutenant Colonel R. Gardner. He's a British Army officer for the Indian Railways magazine article published in London. The effect of this vast movement of people with the interactions it has brought about between what previously were great nationalities practically unknown to one another is now beginning to be felt in the drawing together of the people of India with the recognition of common interests, common ideals and ambitions. In other words, the birth of a common national and patriotic sentiment, which, if well directed, would eventually mold India into a unified and loyal people, still the brightest gem in the imperial crown. So he's bragging about the fact that the railways kind of brought people together. In actuality, it's not really doing that, but that's his point of view. So we could probably do point of view on this one, right? It's coming from a British lieutenant who is looking at this as very successful. And why does he feel that way? Let's spell lieutenant. Lieutenant. Yeah. Army official. How about that? It's too late in the night to try to spell lieutenant. Coming from a British Army official, he thinks that the British have been successful. And why does he think that? The railways bring glory to the empire. Why does he think that? Would he think that if he were Indian? No, he thinks that because he's British, right? Because from his British mindset, he's looking at the positives of the progress that it's brought. He's not worried about the fact that the social classes have to mix. He doesn't care about that. He's looking at like the economic standpoint of it, right? So he thinks that the British have been successful because he is British. And he is looking at the positives of the railroad. Yeah, he sees it as unifying the people. Would he see that if he were Indian? No, we know that's not the case because the other document said the opposite, right? So describing this document, railroads are a success in India because it unifies the people. What group should we put this in? Help develop colonial lands, tensions with other nations, or nationalism? Really, the only one that it fits with would be the helped developed colonial lands. Unless you want to use it to prove, like, if you want to, like, argue that you could take this one and kind of like compare it with the first document and talk about how this is what the British felt like they were doing, but in actuality, it was really causing nationalism. You could probably argue it that way too, but it would probably be easier to just talk about how it's developing colonial lands. So we could say that according to the document, it is bringing people together under a common umbrella of patriotic sentiment, of common umbrella and love for their country. Okay. So what would our thesis be? Now, up until this point, we have written thesis very, very basic, which you can absolutely do. But if you want to get a little bit more involved with it, there is it's kind of like a formula that you're going to learn next year in APUSH. And they basically will say, like, although this happened, this and this also happened. And then they use the extent language. So, for example, we have three different things. We have nationalism happening, we have tensions with nations, with other nations, and we have the facilitation of the building and developing of colonial lands, right? So probably the least impactful, or the one that greatly happens, like if we want to use the word greatly for our extent word, would probably be the construction helps develop the colonial lands, right? So I'm going to start this out and I'm going to say, although railroads, oh wait, I want to go down here in the thesis. Although railroad construction in Asia and Africa, that ties it to your thesis, greatly, there's my extent word, developed, or greatly facilitated the development of European colonial empires. So although it did that, that's our first group, what else did it do? It also aided the growth of nationalism. What extent word could we put with that? It also greatly inspired the growth of nationalism. That's our second group. And somewhat increased tensions between states, because I mean that's not as much, right? It's just talking about Britain and Russia. So we could say, and somewhat increased tension between nations. So does this tie it to the prompt? Yes, because it talks about railroads. It talks about Asia and Africa. It talks about how it affected the colonies. Is it arguable? Can we argue this? Yes, you can argue this. So those are the things that you want to look for in your thesis. Is it your 3 groups? Yes. So now you're going to have a paragraph for each one of those 3 groups. Yeah, and Fardeen, that, you know, it is a little bit harder to write it like that, but if you can, then you've got a better chance of getting that thesis point. As long as you've got the argument in there and you've got your groups, that really helps. But then when you get that extent language in there, that's a sure thing. Tabena says, the railroad significantly affected the process of empire building by creating tensions between nations, helped support colonial lands, and increase the growth of nationalism. That's pretty good. Significantly affected. Yeah, because significantly affected would be your extent language. So yeah, that could work. Okay. Now what I want to show you, I'm about to blow your mind. Are you ready for this? I don't know. I don't know if you're ready. Because this is an old AP test, they have some examples for you. What? Yes, they have some examples for you. So I put the link in the comments. And this one is just the DBQ, but I'll show you where the SAQ ones are too if you want to look through those. So what I want you to do, instead of writing this all out, I want you to take your time and look through these documents and really see some examples of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, okay? So for example, here's some possible thesis examples. And it tells you over here what the rubric wording is, what they're looking for, and then what good examples of those are, all right? Same thing down here with context. So look at these contexts. This is interesting right here. It talks about the Industrial Revolution like you were talking about, but you can't just say the Industrial Revolution. You have to relate it to the topic. So look how they do that. Railroads played an important role in the Industrial Revolution because they provided a faster and more efficient method of overland transportation than had ever existed before. So it's tying it into imperialism. And it says Industrial Revolution technologies aided Europeans in the creation of large empires by linking places together at a cheaper cost. Once again, tying it into imperialism. Yes, very much, Fardeen. Totally agree with you. Then they go down here and they break down the evidence points for you. So this one is the first point. This would be your describes. And then this one would be tying it to an argument. Okay. Same thing here. And then analysis. So they give you examples of what they're looking for with point of view and with audience. Now, in these examples, they don't come right out and say point of view or audience, but I would do that just so that whoever's reading it knows that's what you're going for. All right. But those are good examples to look at and read. Then this kind of talks and breaks down the complexity a little bit more. That one's not one that you can really practice. It's just either there or it's not. So I wouldn't really worry about that point as much. And then this is a really good area that I want you to look at too. This talks about the document. This would be the describes part. And then this would be your point of view, purpose, historical situation. And they have it marked back here for you. Okay. So that kind of helps you a little bit understand those things for each one of the documents. Then it gets real good down here. They give you some acceptable theses and some unacceptable ones. Same with context. Like, for example, unacceptable would be saying railroads were a part of the Industrial Revolution. That's not enough. You have to tie it in there somehow. Okay, so it's good to see what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And then with evidence. So read through some of this, really take some time to look at this. Then all the way at the bottom, if you keep scrolling, there are some actual DBQs that were written by students, and you can kind of look at them and see. I don't know if it says what these kiddos got. Let's see if it says that anywhere. I don't think it says it. Maybe it says it up here. But what you could do is read through them based on what you read in the examples. Read through these examples and see if you can score them. See if you can see which parts and which points they got and which ones they didn't. Because not all of these examples got the full amount of points. So read through those and kind of practice, test yourself. And then if you also have time this week, you want to look at the SAQ. So here's the sample responses for the SAQ questions. I'm going to give you this website as well. It's the 2018 SA answer. So short answer. This one, and this one, and this one, and that one. The questions are going to be in this guide right here. So you can look at the questions, you can try to answer them, and then look at the samples or what they're expecting. The LEQ, you don't have to worry about this year because you're not writing one of those. Okay. And here, this might actually be the scoring. Oh, no. Okay. This was just the distributions. Never mind. So just a quick recap. Look through the sample DBQ stuff. Look through the SAQ stuff. Kind of test yourself. Look at the SAQs before you look at the samples and see if you're getting on the right track. 2017 is right here, and this is also another one that you can practice. Here's the questions. This will be the DBQ, and the SAQ responses over here. After that, or before that, from 2016 and before, it was a different format of a DBQ. So it's probably not going to be as helpful. You can still look at the documents and try to analyze them, and you can look at how they wrote the theses, but they changed the wording, and some of the stuff from the rubric is not the same. So 2017, 2018 are the ones that you want to focus on. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so if you look through these and you have any examples, just let me know. And don't forget about watching period 6 video and the context, and then doing any of this for extra credit, okay? And I am going to delete this, so make sure that you've made a copy. And also put a context down. Try to write a sample context and then look at the examples. Okay. Okay. Well, I will see you later. Thank you to Benna and Fardeen for holding down that comments box. I appreciate it. I think everybody else was too busy typing, right? But thank you guys. I appreciate it. Have a great and wonderful evening, and I will see you tomorrow if you're B-Day. If not, I'll see you on Monday. So have an awesome weekend and study, study, study. Don't give up now. We're in the home stretch. Bye to Benna. Have a good night.